On a frigid winter evening, a lone man spotted two wolves silently pacing at the edge of his property. Instead of baring fangs or growling, these majestic yet terrifying creatures appeared desperate, pawing at his door as though pleading for refuge. When he finally opened that door, he couldn't have anticipated the life-altering moment that awaited him. What exactly did these frozen wolves want? And why would they choose a human's warm hearth over the wild they call home? Warren Pierce was no stranger to harsh winters, having lived in the remote Alaskan countryside all his life. He was well acquainted with sub-zero temperatures and howling winds. His log cabin, sturdy and worn, stood as a testament to years of surviving in one of the world's most unforgiving climates. Yet despite his rugged experience, nothing could have prepared him for the sight that greeted him late one snowy evening. It had been an ordinary day, or as ordinary as it could be in the dead of winter. Warren had chopped enough firewood to last the night and checked on his small vegetable greenhouse, which was kept alive by a single heater. As dusk fell, he retreated indoors, content to spend the long dark hours by his crackling fireplace with a mug of hot tea. Then came a strange scratching at his front door, accompanied by soft whines that cut through the night silence. At first, Warren assumed it was a stray dog, perhaps one of the few feral canines that roamed the outskirts of town. But as he peered out the frosted window, his heart began to pound. There on his porch stood two emaciated wolves. Their once proud coats were matted and dusted with snow, their breaths visible in the frigid air. Instead of snarling or acting aggressively, they trembled with cold and exhaustion. One of them even mustered a weak howl, as if calling for help. Warren's instincts battled with his caution. Wolves were, after all, wild predators. But these animals didn't appear menacing. They seemed desperate. Against his better judgment, Warren grabbed a flashlight and cautiously cracked open his door. The closer wolf took a shaky step forward, its glowing eyes filled not with hostility, but with a pleading intensity. In that moment, any fear he felt was overshadowed by a surge of compassion. What had driven these creatures to seek shelter from a human? And if he let them in, would his act of kindness invite danger into his home? Thus began an extraordinary encounter between a solitary man and two wild wolves, an encounter that would test Warren's resolve, challenge his preconceived notions of nature, and lead him to an outcome no one could have predicted. Warren stood at the threshold of his cabin, heart pounding as he took in the sight of the two wolves. Snow swirled around them, collecting in small drifts by his front door. The temperature had plummeted well below zero, and he could see the animals shivering under their fur. Their wide, luminous eyes seemed to plead for warmth and safety. It was a sight both mesmerizing and unsettling, wild predators begging for sanctuary. Still clutching the doorknob, Warren hesitated. Common sense dictated that inviting wolves into his home was a terrible idea. They were wild, unpredictable, and potentially dangerous. Yet the longer he stared into their haunted expressions, the more convinced he became that they posed no immediate threat. Their trembling bodies and weary demeanor spoke of desperation, not aggression. With a measured inhale, he made a decision. Wincing against the wind, he opened the door wider and gestured for them to come inside. The wolves exchanged a glance, if it could be called that, before cautiously padding forward, their paws leaving faint imprints in the blowing snow. The moment their fur made contact with the cabin's warmth, a shudder seemed to pass through them, as though they were finally releasing the tension they'd carried for miles in the cold. Gracefully, the pair stepped across the threshold and stopped just inside the living area. Warren, moving slowly to avoid startling them, closed the door, sealing out the howling wind. He offered a silent prayer that his instincts weren't wrong. The wolves stood still for a moment, their breaths loud in the sudden quiet of the cabin. Then they began exploring with careful curiosity, noses to the ground, sniffing at furniture and the small pile of firewood near the hearth. Warren stood close by, silently observing. One wolf, a bit smaller with a patch of gray fur across its back, limped slightly, favoring its hind leg. Its rib cage was visible beneath its coat, indicating a long period of hunger. The other wolf, slightly bigger, had a scar running along its muzzle. Despite their emaciated state, they held a quiet dignity, moving without haste or panic. Warren couldn't help but feel a twinge of awe at their raw beauty. He approached the fireplace, tossing in another log to bolster the heat. The crackling flames cast dancing shadows on the walls, and the cabin filled with a warm glow. The wolves turned their attention to the fire, one of them letting out a soft whine as it drew closer. Perhaps it was the first time they'd ever been near such a source of warmth. As the room grew cozier, Warren realized he needed to address the obvious next step: food. He rummaged through his modest pantry, pulling out some meat he'd planned to cook for himself. He wondered if feeding wolves raw cuts was wise, but given their condition, he didn't see much choice. Returning to the living area, he set down a plate of meat on the floor, then stepped back. The smaller wolf approached first, sniffing cautiously before taking a tentative bite. The larger wolf joined, and together they devoured the meal within seconds, their eyes reflecting gratitude and relief. Warren felt a pang of sympathy. How long had it been since they'd eaten? The wild was brutal, and the bitter cold made hunting nearly impossible for weak or injured animals. Once fed, the wolves seemed to relax further, their tense postures softening. Warren, still keeping a respectful distance, settled into a chair near the fireplace. He was keenly aware of the risk he was taking, but something about the wolves' demeanor reassured him. They were exhausted, possibly near death's door, and had reached a point where pride and caution gave way to survival instinct. The fact they allowed him in such close proximity spoke volumes about their desperation and their trust. The hours passed in an odd sort of companionship. Warren tended the fire, flipping through an old novel he'd read countless times, while the wolves dozed fitfully, occasionally lifting their heads at a gust of wind outside or the faint crackle of the hearth. At one point, the larger wolf whimpered softly in its sleep, paws twitching as though running in a dream. Warren felt an unexpected urge to soothe it, but he refrained, respecting the boundary between them. Night wore on, and eventually Warren prepared a makeshift bedding area near the warmest corner of the cabin. He coaxed the wolves there, offering blankets and extra logs on the fire. They accepted, though somewhat warily, curling up with noses tucked under tails. Watching them, Warren realized he should probably get some rest himself. The day had been anything but ordinary, and fatigue weighed on him. Before turning in, he double-checked the locks on his doors and windows, an old habit in bear country. Now, it seemed doubly important given that he had two wolves inside. As he dimmed the lights, he found himself silently praying for a peaceful night free of conflict. He couldn't help but recall stories of wolf attacks, yet his gut told him these creatures were not here to harm him. The first stirrings of dawn arrived sooner than expected. Warren awoke to the gentle glow of sunrise filtering through the frosted windows. He checked the living area, half expecting chaos or some sign of aggression, but instead he found a quiet scene. The wolves were awake yet calm, watching him with expressions that he could only describe as weary gratitude. He stoked the fire, noticing that the smaller wolf's limp seemed worse this morning. Perhaps it had strained itself further during the night. Concerned, Warren decided to see if it would allow him closer. Moving slowly, he kneeled and extended his hand. The wolf eyed him but remained still, as though sensing he meant no harm. Gently, Warren placed his hand on the wolf's hind leg. It flinched, emitting a soft growl of pain, but didn't snap. He detected swelling, maybe an old injury or frostbite. "I'll do what I can," he murmured, as if the wolf could understand. Standing, he gathered a basic first aid kit from his cupboard, mentally thanking his years in the Boy Scouts. He had no veterinary experience, but he could at least clean and bandage the wound. The real challenge would be whether the wolf trusted him enough to permit it. Watching from the corner, the larger wolf tensed, its amber eyes fixed on Warren's every move. Sensing the delicate balance of trust, Warren proceeded with the utmost caution. He knelt beside the smaller wolf, who lay trembling on the blankets, and murmured soothing words. If the wolf allowed this, he might just be able to help. If not, he'd have to back off. One wrong move could trigger the primal instinct still lurking beneath their fragile truce. The smaller wolf stared at Warren with a mix of apprehension and pain, its body quivering as if it were unsure whether to trust this human crouched before it. Warren gently patted the blankets, hoping to coax the wolf into lying still. To his relief, it let out a low whine and rested its head on its paws. The larger wolf remained close by, watching the scene intently, ready to intervene at the slightest hint of threat. Warren opened his rudimentary first aid kit, a mismatched collection of bandages, antiseptics, and gauze. He hadn't used it much in the past, aside from treating the occasional scratch or blister from chopping wood. This was a different scenario entirely. He moved slowly, speaking in soft tones, aware that the smaller wolf could lash out if spooked. "Easy, fella," he murmured, placing a folded towel beneath the wolf's injured hind leg. As he dabbed antiseptic on a cotton swab, the wolf let out a faint growl but didn't pull away. The wound wasn't deep, but it was inflamed, possibly from an earlier injury that had been aggravated by the cold and constant movement. Warren's heart clenched at the thought of how much suffering this creature had likely endured in the wild winter landscape. The larger wolf paced a few feet away, letting out a low rumble of concern. Warren glanced at it, offering a quick nod in acknowledgement. "I'm doing my best," he said, as though the wolf could truly understand. He knew it was a risk to speak aloud and draw attention to himself, but he hoped his calm tone would keep the tension at bay. After cleaning the wound and applying a light bandage, Warren carefully examined the wolf's paw pads, noticing cracks and signs of frostbite. He used a mild ointment to soothe the raw skin before gently wrapping the leg with gauze. Throughout the process, the wolf flinched and whimpered but remained surprisingly cooperative. Once he finished, Warren exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Done," he whispered, slowly removing his hands. The wolf exhaled through its nose, the sound almost like a sigh of relief. Warren offered a small smile, a surge of empathy welling up inside him. With the immediate medical needs addressed, Warren turned his attention to the basic matter of survival. He checked his pantry to see what remained of the food he'd given the wolves earlier. He still had enough supplies to feed them again, but his stock was limited. The realization weighed on him. If these wolves intended to stay longer than a day or two, he'd need a plan to secure more resources, something that wasn't easy during the harsh Alaskan winter. He decided to head out briefly to gather more firewood and check on potential hunting opportunities nearby. Grabbing his coat and gloves, Warren paused at the door, glancing back at the wolves. They watched him, but made no move to follow. "I'll be back soon," he said softly, as if reassuring both them and himself. Stepping outside, Warren was greeted by a stark landscape of white. The sky remained overcast, and the wind cut through his layers of clothing. He trudged through knee-high snow to the wood pile near the edge of his property, filling a sled with logs. Every so often, he scanned the horizon, half expecting to see more wolves or any sign of threatening wildlife. His mind raced with questions. Had these two been part of a larger pack? Were they outcasts? And what would happen if their pack came looking? Once the sled was loaded, Warren took a moment to survey the silent wilderness. The land was beautiful, but it also felt eerily unforgiving. He caught himself imagining the smaller wolf limping through these drifts, hungry and wounded, pushed to the brink of desperation. The thought reaffirmed his decision to help. No creature should have to endure such suffering alone. Upon returning to the cabin, Warren found the wolves lying near the fireplace. The smaller one looked to be in better spirits, occasionally licking at its bandaged leg. The larger wolf, ever vigilant, lifted its head to watch him cross the threshold. Warren unloaded the wood by the fireplace and stoked the flames, sighing in relief as the heat spread across his numb fingers. He unwrapped a portion of his remaining meat supply, placing it on a plate and setting it on the floor. The wolves approached cautiously, grateful for the meal but aware of Warren's presence. As they ate, he considered how surreal the situation was, two wild wolves devouring his provisions within the comfort of his living room. Yet he felt no fear, only a growing bond forged through mutual survival. Hours later, the cabin had fallen into a peaceful rhythm. Warren dozed in his armchair by the fire, the flickering light casting dancing shadows on the wooden walls. The wolves rested on the blankets he'd arranged for them, rising only to lap water from a bowl he'd placed nearby. It occurred to him that he should contact someone, perhaps a local ranger or wildlife specialist, but a part of him worried that doing so might lead to the wolves being taken away or, worse, put down if deemed a threat. Conflicted, he resolved to wait another day to see if they'd regain their strength and perhaps wander back into the wild on their own. He felt a twinge of guilt at the thought of wanting to keep them around longer. Their presence, though unusual, gave him a sense of purpose. Night fell again, and the wind howled outside. Inside the cabin, the glow of the hearth remained a steadfast beacon against the darkness. Warren, restless from the day's events, found himself pacing. The wolves watched him, their gaze quiet and understanding. It was as if they recognized his turmoil. Eventually, he sank into the chair, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. What would the morrow bring? Would the wolves depart, returning to the life nature intended for them? Or would they linger, forging an even deeper connection to this human who had opened his heart and home? Warren couldn't be sure. All he knew was that the next few days would test his compassion, his resourcefulness, and possibly his limits. Dawn broke with a fragile light, casting a pale glow across the snow-covered land. Inside Warren's cabin, the warmth of the hearth enveloped Warren and his two unexpected guests. As he stirred from sleep, Warren noticed something peculiar. The larger wolf was no longer lying by the fire. A slight sense of alarm washed over him. Had it slipped out into the night? Could it have ventured back into the freezing wilderness? His concern was quickly answered by a low growl emanating from the far corner of the living room. There, standing protectively over the smaller, injured wolf, was the larger one. Its ears flattened, hackles raised. It wasn't looking at Warren, however, but rather at the door. Warren's heart lurched. What had startled the wolf? Rising cautiously, he moved toward the window. Outside, in the morning's half-light, he caught sight of movement. Something was skulking just beyond the edge of his property, near the tree line. His breath fogged the cold glass as he peered out more intently. At first, he thought it might be another animal, a moose or a bear, but then a human silhouette emerged from behind a thick pine. Adrenaline coursed through Warren. He didn't often have visitors, especially not during the harshest part of winter. Grabbing his coat and a flashlight, he pressed an ear to the door, listening for any sound. The larger wolf continued to growl, as though reinforcing the warning that someone was out there. The smaller wolf struggled to rise, whining softly. "It's all right," Warren whispered, hoping to soothe them both, and himself. He opened the door just a crack, a blast of cold air rushing in. Outside, the figure had vanished from immediate view, but footprints in the snow led around the side of the cabin. Warren stepped out, nerves on edge. The wind nipped at his face, and he tucked his gloved hands under his arms. Scanning the tree line, he caught a glimpse of motion again, near the wood pile. This time, curiosity clashed with caution. Whoever was skulking around might be in trouble, or they might pose a threat. Summoning courage, Warren raised his voice. "Hello? If you need help, say something." The only response was the howling wind. He took a few tentative steps forward, leaving footprints that overlapped those of the mysterious intruder. His heart thumped loudly in his ears. Had news spread about the wolves? Could someone be searching for them, or planning harm? When no answer came, he decided to circle around the cabin to check for damage or signs of forced entry. The snow crunched underfoot, every sound amplified in the crisp air. The path led him past the wood pile, where he noticed fresh gouges in the bark of a nearby tree. As he leaned in to inspect, a sudden voice made him whirl around. "Are they inside?" A woman's voice demanded, low and urgent. She was bundled in a heavy parka, her face partially concealed by a hood and scarf. Only her eyes were visible, intense, worried eyes that flickered toward the cabin's door. Warren raised his hands in a gesture of peace. "Who are you?" he asked, attempting to keep his tone calm despite the jolt of surprise. Her gaze narrowed. "I'm hunting those wolves," she said, as though it were obvious. "They belong to a nearby pack. They went missing, and I've been tracking them for days." The statement startled Warren. "Hunting them," he echoed, his pulse quickening. Fear for the wolves gripped him. Was this woman intent on harming them, or could she be a ranger or researcher? She exhaled, her breath forming a small cloud. "Not like that," she clarified, as if reading his expression. "I'm trying to help them. I'm with a wildlife rehabilitation group. We've been monitoring this pack for a while, especially these two." Her voice softened with concern. "The smaller one's been injured and separated from the group. They won't survive out here alone." Relief flooded Warren, yet suspicion lingered. "Why not come to my door instead of skulking around?" The woman glanced away, embarrassed. "I wasn't sure what I'd find. I had to confirm they were here. People can be unpredictable when it comes to wolves." Warren couldn't argue with that. "Come inside," he offered, gesturing toward the cabin. "But move slowly. They're skittish, and I don't want them to feel threatened." Leading her inside, Warren braced himself for potential conflict. The larger wolf, sensing the newcomer, let out a warning bark, placing itself between the woman and the injured companion. The woman carefully removed her hood and scarf, revealing tired but determined features. She crouched, extending her hands, palms up, in a sign of peace. "Hey there, big guy," she murmured. "It's okay. I'm a friend." Her soothing tone was reminiscent of a vet or an experienced wildlife handler. Slowly, she inched closer, her eyes never leaving the wolf's. Warren watched in awe as the creature, after some hesitation, allowed her nearer. "My name's Kara, by the way," the woman said over her shoulder, sensing Warren's watchful curiosity. "I'm a field researcher at the North Ridge Wildlife Center." Kara's calm demeanor seemed to reassure the wolves. She examined the smaller one's bandaged leg, nodding approvingly at Warren's efforts. "You did a good job cleaning this up," she said, her voice laced with admiration. "Might have saved its life." Warren exhaled a breath he'd been holding. "I was just trying to help," he said softly. Kara explained that the pack these wolves came from had been understudy due to dwindling numbers in the region. The smaller wolf, she revealed, was a young female who'd likely been injured by a trap or a territorial fight. The larger wolf was a close sibling, practically her only family. The pair had gone missing during a blizzard, and the research team feared the worst until Kara picked up their tracks. As she spoke, the wolves relaxed visibly, their posture easing as though they recognized her scent or voice. Warren felt a swell of relief and a stab of sadness too. He realized that their time with him might be nearing its end. The wolves needed professional care, and, ultimately, they needed to return to the wild where they belonged. "You're going to take them back to your center?" Warren asked quietly. Kara nodded. "We have an enclosure where we can treat her leg properly. Once she's healed, we'll release them back into their territory." She paused, shooting him a kind look. "Of course, only if you're okay with that. They're on your property, after all." Warren glanced at the wolves, a strange pang twisting in his chest. He'd grown unexpectedly attached in such a short time, but he knew what he had to do. "It's what's best for them, right?" "It is," Kara confirmed gently. "They're wild creatures. They'll thrive once they're healthy and can rejoin their pack." In that moment, Warren felt the weight of compassion and responsibility clash. He wanted to keep them safe under his roof forever, to shield them from the harsh realities beyond his cabin walls. Yet he understood that real freedom, real survival, meant returning to the land they knew. Standing, he offered Kara a tight smile. "Then let's do what needs to be done. I'll help in any way I can." Kara's presence brought a sudden shift to the dynamic in Warren's cabin. For the wolves, she was a familiar figure, someone whose scent and demeanor they recognized as safe, if not entirely trusted. For Warren, she was an unexpected solution to a looming dilemma: how to provide the animals with the care they needed without compromising their wild nature. After the initial introductions, Kara set down her gear in a corner of the cabin and approached the smaller wolf. She examined the bandaged leg with a practiced touch, her brow furrowing at the signs of swelling. "It's not infected," she remarked, glancing at Warren, "but she'll need proper treatment at our facility. You did well with what you had." Warren felt a mixture of relief and pride. He noticed how gently Kara interacted with the wolves, speaking in a soothing tone, her posture non-threatening. The larger wolf observed her carefully, occasionally letting out a low whine as if voicing concern for its companion. "This must be her sibling," Kara said, nodding at the watchful guardian. "Wolves form strong family bonds. If she's injured, he won't leave her side." Warren gave a thoughtful nod. Over the past couple of days, he'd witnessed that bond firsthand. The bigger wolf had consistently shielded the smaller one, sharing its meager warmth during those cold, stormy nights. With evening approaching, Warren proposed they stay in the cabin one more night before attempting to transport the wolves. Kara agreed, noting the need to keep the stress on the animals as low as possible. She suggested they gradually acclimate them to being in a carrier or a vehicle, if they could arrange one nearby. "I have a snowmobile," Warren offered. "It could help us reach your team faster, or carry them part of the way if the roads are impassable." Kara's face lit up with gratitude. "That would be perfect. My truck's parked a few miles out, but the snow's too deep to drive it here safely." They spent the next hour discussing logistics. The plan was for Kara to radio her colleagues at dawn. They'd prepare a safe enclosure at the Wildlife Center, and Warren would help transport the wolves over the snowy terrain. It sounded straightforward, But Warren knew the wilderness rarely cooperated with human plans. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the cabin took on a gentle glow from the fire. The two wolves, calmer now, rested side by side, their breathing slow and steady. Kara observed them with a tender gaze. "I've tracked them for months," she said quietly. "They used to run with a pack of about 6, but then we lost their signals during a blizzard, and I feared the worst." Warren poked at the embers in the fireplace, a pang of empathy tugging at him. "They must have been separated somehow. It's a miracle they found me. Or that I found them." Kara nodded. "Wolves are highly social. Being cut off from their pack can be a death sentence, especially for an injured member. It's amazing they survived this long." Their conversation drifted to lighter topics. Her life as a researcher, Warren's quiet existence in the remote cabin, the challenges of living in such unforgiving conditions. Outside, the wind had died down, leaving a stillness that felt both peaceful and eerie. Every so often, the wolves shifted or let out a soft exhale, reminding Warren of their presence and the delicate trust they had offered him. Before turning in for the night, Warren set out food for the wolves once more. Kara, cautious but intrigued, observed his method. She was impressed by how at ease the animals seemed around him. "You've done something incredible here," she said, her voice laced with admiration. "Most wolves would be too terrified or aggressive to enter a human's home like this, but they clearly sense your goodwill." Warren flushed slightly, not accustomed to such praise. "I couldn't just leave them to freeze," he mumbled. "They were desperate, and well, I guess I was too." "Too?" Kara echoed, curiosity in her eyes. Warren hesitated, then gave a half-smile. "Living out here alone can be tough. Maybe, in a strange way, I needed them as much as they needed me." During the night, the wind picked up again, howling around the cabin. The structure groaned under the gusts, and snow pelted the windows. Warren and Kara woke at intervals to check on the wolves, who, despite the commotion, slept in relative calm. The larger wolf would occasionally lift its head, ears alert, as though scanning for danger. Each time, it relaxed after a moment, perhaps realizing it was finally safe. By the time morning arrived, gray light filtered through the frosted windows. Kara rubbed the sleep from her eyes, yawning. "I'll try to reach my colleagues now," she said, pulling out a compact radio from her gear. She stepped outside, braving the biting cold to find a clearer signal. Warren started a pot of coffee, the rich aroma filling the cabin. The wolves stirred, blinking slowly. The smaller one's bandaged leg seemed to have improved slightly, though it still showed signs of swelling. Warren offered them fresh water, quietly marveling at how natural it felt to care for these wild creatures. When Kara returned, her expression was a mix of relief and urgency. "They're sending help," she announced. "2 of my team members will meet us at a rendezvous point about 3 miles from here, near a frozen creek. If we can get the wolves there, they'll transport them the rest of the way." Warren nodded. "Then we'd better pack up. The snowmobile can handle 2 people and the wolves, if we're careful." Kara agreed, and they began gathering the necessary supplies. They rigged a makeshift sled to attach behind the snowmobile, lining it with blankets so the injured wolf could lie comfortably. The larger wolf, though wary of the contraption, seemed to sense it was necessary and sniffed at it without protest. The final hurdle was coaxing the wolves outside and into the sled. Warren decided to go first, opening the cabin door to a world of glistening white. A chill wind swept in, ruffling the wolves' fur. Kara led the way, speaking softly, using gentle gestures. The smaller wolf whimpered as it was lifted into the sled, but the bandage and ointment must have offered some relief, for it didn't fight too fiercely. The larger wolf hopped up on its own, nestling protectively against its sibling. With the wolves secured, Warren climbed onto the snowmobile, and Kara settled in behind him, holding a radio in her hand. The engine roared to life, echoing across the silent expanse. As they pulled away from the cabin, Warren felt a pang of mixed emotion. Part of him was reluctant to leave this temporary haven where man and wolf had coexisted in such an extraordinary way. But he knew this journey was essential for the wolves' sake, and perhaps for his own. The snowmobile carved a track through the endless white, its engine's growl the only sound in a world muffled by ice and snow. Warren led the way, gripping the handlebars firmly, while Kara sat behind him, keeping a watchful eye on the makeshift sled tethered behind them. Inside the sled, the two wolves huddled together, the smaller one's bandaged leg tucked close, the larger wolf protectively curled around its sibling. They aimed to reach the frozen creek, a rendezvous point where Kara's colleagues would be waiting. The journey would span roughly 3 miles, a distance that felt both too short and perilously long. While the sun offered a faint warmth, the Alaskan winter remained unforgiving, and a stiff breeze carried flecks of snow that stung any exposed skin. As they traversed the rugged terrain, Kara frequently glanced down at her radio, checking for updates from her team. The signal crackled occasionally, distorted by the thick forest and the looming mountains. "They said they'd meet us in about an hour," Kara announced, raising her voice over the wind. "We need to keep a steady pace." Warren nodded, focusing on guiding the snowmobile around drifts and hidden rocks. Every so often, he glanced back to ensure the wolves weren't too jostled by the bumpy ride. The larger wolf's ears twitched at every turn, but it seemed to trust that Warren and Kara meant no harm. 10 minutes into the journey, the sky began to change. A bank of steel-gray clouds gathered on the horizon, hinting at an approaching storm. Warren felt a twinge of worry. Traveling in a snowstorm, especially with injured wildlife in tow, was a risk he'd hoped to avoid. "Let's pick up speed," he said, turning his head slightly so Kara could hear. She agreed, tapping him on the shoulder to signal she'd brace for the jolts. The sled thumped against icy ridges, sending small snow showers cascading over the wolves. They whimpered, but neither attempted to leap out, perhaps understanding this was their best chance. The forest thickened, and visibility deteriorated as the trees closed in. Warren slowed the snowmobile, carefully weaving around trunks and low-hanging branches weighed down by snow. A wrong move could topple them or damage the sled. "We're close to the creek," Kara noted, checking a small handheld GPS. "If we follow the tree line, we should see it soon." Before long, they emerged into a wide clearing. The creek, frozen solid, gleamed under the weak sunlight. Its surface was littered with blown snow, making it look like a smooth, icy road. "We should cross here," Kara suggested. "My team should be on the far bank." Warren eased the snowmobile onto the ice, testing its stability. The ice groaned faintly but held firm as they glided across. He couldn't help but marvel at the harsh beauty of the landscape, pristine, silent, and vast. Yet with every passing minute, the dark clouds crept closer, casting an ominous shadow over the distant peaks. Halfway across the creek, the radio crackled to life. "Kara, this is Dan," came a muffled voice. "We're approaching from the east, but the storm's moving in faster than expected. You might have to hunker down if it hits before we reach you." Kara exchanged a worried glance with Warren. "Copy that, Dan," she replied. "We're crossing the creek now, should reach the far side soon." "Where exactly will you be?" "Look for a red marker on a pine," Dan's voice crackled. "We'll set up a temporary shelter there." As if on cue, the wind began to howl, blowing gusts of snow across the ice. Visibility dropped further, and Warren fought to keep the snowmobile steady. The wolves, sensing the shifting atmosphere, let out anxious whines. The smaller one whimpered, shivering from either cold or fear or both. Kara placed a calming hand on Warren's shoulder. "Just a little further," she encouraged. "We'll find that marker." They reached the creek's far side, where the tree line resumed, looming like silent sentinels. The wind whipped snow into their faces, making it hard to see. Warren squinted, scanning the trunks for any sign of red. At last, through the swirling white, he spotted a faint splash of color on a tall pine. Relief flooded him as he guided the snowmobile toward it. Sure enough, beneath the pine stood a half-erected shelter, two people in thick winter gear struggling to secure tarps against the relentless wind. A small fire crackled nearby, offering a beacon of heat. Kara waved frantically, and the figures turned, raising their arms in greeting. Once the snowmobile drew close, Warren killed the engine. Kara jumped off, speaking rapidly to her colleagues over the roar of the wind. "We found them," she said, jerking her thumb toward the sled. "They're weak but stable. The smaller one's got a leg injury." Dan, tall with a salt and pepper beard, nodded grimly. "Let's get them under shelter," he said. His companion, a short woman named Nina, hurried to lay out thick blankets inside the makeshift camp. "That storm's about to hammer us," Nina warned, her voice tight with urgency. The wind howled mercilessly as Warren helped Dan and Nina secure the temporary shelter. Snow swirled around them in blinding sheets, transforming the quiet wilderness into a chaotic maelstrom of white. Within minutes, visibility had dropped to mere feet. "We need to move the wolves now," Kara shouted over the wind, already working to untether the makeshift sled from Warren's snowmobile. Warren rushed to help, his gloved hands fumbling with the knots that had tightened during their journey. The larger wolf watched him warily, its amber eyes reflecting both trust and apprehension. The smaller one trembled visibly, its injured leg seeming more painful after the bumpy ride. "Easy now," Warren murmured as he and Dan carefully lifted the sled. The wolves tensed but remained still, perhaps understanding that resistance would only worsen their situation. Inside the shelter, Nina had prepared a space lined with thermal blankets. A small portable heater hummed softly in the corner, battling against the plummeting temperature outside. The team worked swiftly, transferring the wolves to this makeshift sanctuary. "I've got some antibiotics and pain medication," Nina explained, opening a sturdy medical kit. "We should treat her leg before the storm gets worse." Kara nodded, gently unwrapping Warren's makeshift bandage from the smaller wolf's leg. The wound looked angrier than before, red and inflamed from the journey. The wolf whimpered as Nina applied antiseptic and a fresh bandage, but didn't attempt to bite or flee. "She's remarkably calm," Dan observed, keeping a respectful distance. Most wolves would be panicking by now. Warren felt a surge of pride. "They've been through a lot," he said quietly. "I think they know we're trying to help." Outside, the storm intensified. Wind rattled the shelter's frame, and snow accumulated rapidly against its sides. Dan checked his satellite phone, his expression growing more concerned with each passing moment. "No signal," he reported grimly. "And this storm's projected to last at least 12 hours. We're not going anywhere tonight." Kara sighed, running a hand through her hair. "We need to conserve fuel for the heater," she said. "It'll be a cold night." Warren removed his heavy outer coat, draping it over the smaller wolf. "We'll manage," he assured them, though privately he worried about their dwindling supplies. He hadn't expected to be stranded in a blizzard, and his pack contained minimal provisions. As darkness fell, the four humans huddled around the heater, taking turns feeding small pieces of jerky to the wolves. The storm showed no signs of abating. If anything, it grew more ferocious with each passing hour. The shelter groaned under the weight of accumulating snow, and occasional drafts slipped through cracks in the tarp. "We should take shifts sleeping," Dan suggested. "Someone needs to keep an eye on the heater and make sure the shelter holds." The others agreed, with Warren volunteering for the first watch. As his companions settled down to rest, he sat cross-legged near the wolves, watching their steady breathing. The larger wolf's eyes remained open, fixed on Warren with an intensity that felt almost like communication. "We'll get through this," Warren whispered, not sure if he was reassuring the wolf or himself. Hours crept by, marked only by the howling wind and occasional adjustments to the heater. Warren's thoughts wandered back to his cabin, now miles away. Strange how quickly life could change. Just days ago, he'd been alone, content in his solitude. Now he found himself stranded in a storm, surrounded by strangers and wild animals, yet feeling more connected than he had in years. Around midnight, the larger wolf suddenly lifted its head, ears perked forward. A low growl rumbled in its throat, causing Warren to tense. Something had disturbed the animal, perhaps just the storm, or perhaps something more concerning. Warren strained to listen, trying to discern any unusual sounds beneath the wind's constant roar. For a moment, he heard nothing out of the ordinary. Then, faintly, a different kind of howl pierced the night. A wolf's call, distant but unmistakable. The larger wolf responded immediately, letting out a soft whine. Beside it, the injured female stirred, lifting her head weakly. Warren exchanged a glance with Kara, who had awakened at the commotion. "That's their pack," she whispered, eyes wide. "They must be searching." Another howl echoed through the night, closer this time. The larger wolf grew increasingly agitated, pacing the small confines of the shelter. Its sibling attempted to rise, but lacked the strength, collapsing back onto the blankets with a pained whimper. Dan sat up, instantly alert. "If the pack finds us, they might feel threatened," he warned. "Cornered wolves can be dangerous." Warren considered their options. The storm made travel impossible, yet staying put might lead to a confrontation with wild wolves seeking their missing members. Neither choice seemed favorable. Maybe, Warren began slowly, an idea forming. Maybe we could signal to them somehow. Let them know their pack members are safe without bringing them too close to the shelter. Nina looked skeptical. How would we do that? We could record their howls and play them back, Kara suggested, reaching for her research equipment. It might reassure the pack that they're alive without encouraging them to approach. It was a risky plan, but with few alternatives, they decided to attempt it. Kara set up a small recording device, capturing the larger wolf's occasional responses to its distant pack. Then, bundling up against the bitter cold, she and Warren stepped just outside the shelter's entrance. The storm's fury hit them like a physical blow. Warren shielded his face as Kara aimed the speaker toward the direction of the howls. The recorded wolf calls played out, slightly distorted by the wind, but recognizable nonetheless. For several tense minutes, there was no response. Then, from somewhere in the swirling darkness, a chorus of howls answered, acknowledging, perhaps even relieved. The sound faded, suggesting the pack was moving away rather than approaching. I think it worked, Kara said breathlessly as they retreated into the shelter. They know their members are alive, but they're keeping their distance. Warren nodded, brushing snow from his coat. Inside, the larger wolf had calmed somewhat, though it remained alert. The smaller one had drifted back to sleep, her breathing shallow but steady. We should try to rest, Nina advised. Tomorrow won't be any easier. Morning arrived with an eerie stillness. The storm had passed sometime during the night, leaving behind a transformed landscape buried under fresh snow. Sunlight glinted off the pristine white surface, almost painfully bright after the previous day's darkness. Warren was the first to step outside, marveling at the silent beauty. The forest stood frosted and still, with no sign of wolves or any other wildlife. Behind him, Dan emerged from the shelter, squinting in the brightness. We need to move quickly, he said, surveying their surroundings, before another system moves in. They worked efficiently, dismantling the shelter while Nina prepared the wolves for transport. The smaller female's condition had stabilized overnight. The antibiotics seemed to be working, and she appeared more alert than before. The larger wolf remained protective but less anxious, perhaps sensing that the worst had passed. Kara successfully contacted their base camp using the satellite phone, which now had clear signal. A properly equipped vehicle was already en route to meet them at a trading post about 2 miles east. Can your snowmobile handle that distance? Kara asked Warren, concerned about asking more of him after all he'd already done. Warren nodded. It'll manage. I want to see this through. The journey to the trading post was remarkably peaceful compared to the previous day's ordeal. The fresh snow made for smooth travel, and the wolves seemed to have accepted their fate, resting quietly in the reinforced carrier that Dan and Nina had brought. Warren led the way on his snowmobile, with Kara riding behind him and the others following on their own vehicle. The trading post, little more than a small general store with a few cabins for rent, appeared on the horizon around noon. A large, specially equipped truck with the North Ridge Wildlife Center logo waited in the parking area, along with 2 additional staff members. Warren felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness as they transferred the wolves to the climate-controlled compartment in the back of the truck. The smaller female went willingly, perhaps too weak to resist. The larger wolf hesitated, looking back at Warren with those intelligent amber eyes before reluctantly entering the carrier. They'll receive the best care possible, Kara assured him, sensing his melancholy. Once they're healthy, we'll release them back into their territory. Warren nodded, knowing it was for the best, but feeling the loss nonetheless. Will you let me know, he asked, when they're released? Kara smiled warmly. I'll do better than that. You can come along if you'd like. The offer surprised him. Really? Of course, she replied. You saved their lives, Warren. You deserve to see them return home. As the wildlife team made final preparations for departure, Warren found himself standing somewhat awkwardly by his snowmobile. The adventure was ending, and soon he'd be alone again in his cabin. The thought felt strangely hollow now. Dan approached, extending a gloved hand. We can't thank you enough, he said sincerely. Not many people would have done what you did. Warren shook his hand, shrugging modestly. Anyone would have helped, seeing them like that. No, Dan said firmly. Most people would have called animal control, or just closed their door. You showed real compassion. Before Warren could respond, Nina joined them, offering him a small package. Some supplies for your trip home, she explained. And my card. We're always looking for locals who understand wildlife if you're ever interested in volunteering. The gesture touched Warren deeply. For years, he'd existed on the periphery of the community, content in his isolation. Now he was being invited to participate, to contribute something meaningful. As the wildlife center's truck pulled away, Warren watched until it disappeared around a bend in the snow-covered road. Kara had promised to call him within a week with updates on the wolf's condition. It gave him something to look forward to, a connection to maintain. The journey back to his cabin was solitary, but not lonely. His mind buzzed with new possibilities. Perhaps his remote lifestyle didn't have to mean complete isolation. Perhaps there was room for occasional purpose beyond mere survival. His cabin appeared exactly as he'd left it, a plume of smoke still rising from the chimney thanks to the slow-burning logs he'd arranged before departing. Yet somehow it felt different, emptier without the wolves, but fuller with fresh memories and potential. That evening, as Warren stoked the fire and prepared a simple meal, he found himself listening for the scratch of paws or soft whines that would never come. The wolves had left an imprint on his life, brief though their stay had been. He wondered if they too would remember him, or if wild animals lived too much in the present for such sentiments. To unexpected guests, he murmured, raising his mug in a solitary toast. True to her word, Kara called exactly 1 week later. The wolves were responding well to treatment at the center. The female's leg was healing nicely, though she would likely always have a slight limp. The pair remained inseparable, and researchers had confirmed through DNA testing that they were indeed siblings from the same litter. We're planning to release them in about 3 weeks, Kara explained. Their pack is still in the same territory, and our tracking shows they're thriving despite losing these 2 members. Warren found himself oddly nervous at the prospect of seeing the wolves again. Do you think they'll remember me? He asked, immediately feeling foolish for the question. Kara's laugh was warm, not mocking. Wolves have excellent memories, especially for those who've helped them. I can't promise they'll come running up to thank you. But yes, I think they'll remember. In the days that followed, Warren found himself preparing for the release with unexpected enthusiasm. He read books about wolf behavior that Kara had recommended and assisted with a small project at the Wildlife Center, building feeding stations for rehabilitating animals. The work connected him to people who shared his appreciation for the wilderness, without demanding more social interaction than he was comfortable with. 3 weeks passed quickly. The morning of the release dawned clear and cold. Perfect conditions, according to Kara. Warren met the wildlife team at a designated area about 20 miles from his cabin, deep in the territory the tracking data indicated belonged to the wolves' pack. The siblings were transported in separate carriers, though placed side by side to minimize stress. Warren peered through the mesh door of the larger wolf's carrier, surprised to see how much healthier it looked. Its coat had regained a glossy sheen, and its eyes were bright and alert. When their gazes met, Warren could have sworn he saw recognition there, a flicker of acknowledgement before the wolf turned away, already sensing the familiar smells of its home territory. We've tracked the main pack to a clearing about a half-mile north, Dan explained, consulting a handheld device. We'll release these 2 here and let them find their own way back. Less stressful for everyone that way. The team moved with practiced efficiency, positioning the carriers in a small clearing surrounded by pine trees. Warren stood back alongside Kara, watching as Nina and Dan prepared to open the doors simultaneously. Ready? Kara asked softly. Warren nodded, his throat unexpectedly tight with emotion. Ready. At Dan's signal, the carriers were opened. For a breathless moment, nothing happened. Then, cautiously, the larger wolf emerged first, stepping into the snow with deliberate movements. It paused, nose raised high to catch the scents on the wind. The smaller female followed more hesitantly, her heeled legs supporting her weight, but still favored slightly. The wolves stood close together, surveying their surroundings. Neither made any immediate move to flee, seeming almost confused by their sudden freedom. The female turned, looking directly at the humans who had cared for her. Her gaze lingered on Warren longest of all. Then, from somewhere in the distance, a howl echoed through the trees, a calling, a welcome home. Both wolves perked up instantly, ears forward, bodies tense with anticipation. The larger wolf responded with a howl of its own, a sound that sent shivers down Warren's spine. Without further hesitation, the pair bounded away, the female moving with surprising agility despite her injury. They disappeared into the trees, two shadows merging with the forest that was their true home. "They'll be okay," Kara said reassuringly, placing a hand on Warren's arm. "Their pack will accept them back. Wolves are remarkably forgiving of absence when it comes to family." Warren nodded, feeling a complex mixture of joy and loss. "It's where they belong," he said quietly. As the team packed up their equipment, Warren stood staring at the wolves' tracks in the snow, already beginning to fill with wind-blown powder. Soon there would be no visible trace of their presence, yet he knew he would carry the memory of these creatures for the rest of his life. The drive back was silent, each person lost in their own thoughts. For Warren, the experience had awakened something he hadn't realized was dormant, a desire for connection, not just with humans, but with the natural world he had chosen to live alongside. "What will you do now?" Kara asked as they approached the turn-off to his cabin. Warren considered the question thoughtfully. "Keep living out here," he said finally. "But maybe differently." She smiled, understanding in her eyes. "The center could always use another volunteer who knows the area." "I'd like that," he admitted. "To help when I can." At his cabin, Warren stepped out of Kara's truck, breathing in the crisp air that felt somehow fresher than before. The wildlife team would continue their work, tracking the wolves and ensuring their successful reintegration. Life would go on, following its natural rhythms. Yet something had shifted in Warren's world. The wolves that had sought refuge at his door had left him with more than just memories. They had awakened him to possibilities he hadn't considered before. That night, as Warren sat by his fire reading one of the books Kara had lent him, he thought he heard a distant howl. Perhaps it was just the wind playing tricks, or perhaps it was a message from old friends, a reminder that even in the vast wilderness, no creature was truly alone. 3 months later, Warren's cabin had undergone subtle but significant changes. A small desk beneath the eastern window now held field guides, wildlife tracking journals, and a radio that connected him to the research center. Twice weekly, he ventured out to check cameras that monitored wildlife movements throughout the region, part of a larger study Kara had initiated. Spring had arrived, transforming the frozen landscape into a vibrant tapestry of new growth. Warren followed a familiar path through the forest, a route that had become something of a ritual for him. It led to a ridge overlooking a vast valley, prime wolf territory according to the tracking data. He settled on a fallen log, binoculars ready, notebook open. This was his favorite part of volunteering, the quiet observation, the patient waiting. Sometimes he saw nothing but swaying trees and foraging birds. Other times, he glimpsed the wolves going about their lives, unaware or perhaps indifferent to his distant presence. Today, luck was with him. A small group of wolves emerged from the tree line below, moving with purpose across a meadow dotted with early wildflowers. Warren recognized several individuals from Kara's descriptions and photographs. His heart quickened when he spotted a wolf with a distinctive limp, the female he had cared for during those stormy winter days. She looked healthy despite her permanent injury, keeping pace with her packmates with only minor adjustments to her gait. Beside her trotted her constant companion, the larger wolf who had guarded her so fiercely in Warren's cabin. They moved with the confidence of creatures perfectly at home in their environment. Warren made careful notes about their behavior, the time of day, weather conditions, all data points that would contribute to the center's research. But beyond the scientific value, these moments held personal significance. They were confirmation that his intervention had mattered, that compassion had tangible results. As he watched, the wolves paused in their journey. The female suddenly lifted her head, nose testing the air. Slowly, deliberately, she turned toward the ridge where Warren sat motionless. Though hundreds of yards separated them, he felt a jolt of connection when those amber eyes seemed to find him. For several heartbeats, wolf and man regarded each other across the distance. Warren didn't move, barely breathed. Then, with a flick of her tail, the female resumed her path, disappearing into the forest with her pack. Warren smiled to himself. Recognition? Coincidence? It didn't really matter. What mattered was that life continued its intricate dance, and he had found his place within it, not as a mere observer, but as an active participant. Later that evening, as Warren reported his sightings to Kara over the radio. She shared an interesting development. The female you helped, we've been calling her Athena, appears to be pregnant, she explained, excitement evident in her voice. First-time mother, based on our records. Should deliver sometime in the next few weeks. The news filled Warren with unexpected emotion. That's amazing, he said finally. Will she manage okay with her leg? Wolves are incredibly adaptable, Kara assured him. The whole pack will help with the pups. That's what makes them special. They take care of their own. After signing off, Warren stepped outside onto his porch. The night was clear, stars scattered across the vast darkness above. Somewhere in the forest, Athena and her pack were preparing for new life, continuing a cycle as old as time itself. Warren had once thought he understood solitude, embraced it even. But the wolves had taught him a different lesson, that true strength often lies in connection, in the bonds formed when compassion overcomes fear. His cabin was still his sanctuary, but it was no longer his entire world. In the distance, a chorus of howls rose into the night air, the wolves singing their ancient song to the moon and stars. Warren closed his eyes and listened, feeling privileged to share this wild place, this moment in time, with creatures who had once trusted him with their lives. When the howling faded, Warren remained on the porch a while longer. Tomorrow would bring new tracks to follow, new data to collect, perhaps even new glimpses of old friends. The wilderness that had once seemed merely a backdrop to his solitary existence now pulsed with stories and relationships he was only beginning to understand. Life had changed when the wolves came to Warren's door that winter night. Not dramatically or suddenly, but in subtle, profound ways that continued to unfold with each passing day. He had opened his door to desperate creatures seeking refuge, never imagining that in saving them, he would also be saving something in himself. As spring bloomed into summer, Warren's connection to the wildlife center deepened. He expanded his volunteer work, helping with everything from tracking to habitat assessment. His knowledge of the local terrain proved invaluable, and his observations of wolf behavior were detailed and insightful. Kara visited his cabin regularly, sometimes staying for dinner and sharing stories of her research. Their friendship had grown naturally, built on mutual respect and shared passion for the wilderness. She brought news of Athena and her pack, including the remarkable development that the female wolf had successfully delivered a litter of 5 healthy pups. The whole pack is helping raise them, Kara explained one evening as they sat on Warren's porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains. Her brother, the one we've named Orion, is particularly attentive. Acts almost like a second parent. Warren smiled, remembering the protective larger wolf. Not surprised. He wouldn't leave her side, even when they were both starving. Family, Kara said simply. It means as much to them as it does to us, just in different ways. The comment lingered in Warren's mind long after Kara had departed. Family had been an abstract concept to him for many years. His parents were long gone, and he had no siblings or children. Yet somehow, these wild creatures had awakened a sense of connection he'd forgotten was possible. In late summer, Warren received an unexpected invitation. The Wildlife Center was hosting an educational event for local children, teaching them about wolves and conservation efforts. Kara wanted him to speak about his experience with Athena and Orion. Me? Warren asked, surprised. I'm not much of a public speaker. Just tell your story, Kara encouraged. These kids need to understand that wolves aren't the villains from fairy tales. Your perspective would be invaluable. Reluctantly, Warren agreed. When the day arrived, he found himself standing before 20 eager faces, children aged 7 to 12 seated on logs in the center's outdoor classroom. Their attentive expressions made him nervous at first, but as he began describing the night 2 desperate wolves appeared at his door, words flowed more easily. He spoke of the wolves' intelligence, their loyalty to each other, their trust in him despite their natural wariness of humans. He described treating Athena's injured leg, feeding them when they were too weak to hunt, and the bittersweet moment of watching them return to the wild. Wolves are a lot like us in some ways, he concluded. They need their families. They take care of each other. And sometimes, they need a little help from their neighbors, even if those neighbors happen to be humans. The children's questions afterward were thoughtful and genuine. One small girl with braided hair raised her hand timidly. Do you miss them? She asked. The wolves. Warren considered the question seriously. Yes, he admitted. But I'm happier knowing they're where they belong, living as wolves should live. After the presentation, Kara pulled him aside, her expression unusually serious. There's something I've been wanting to discuss with you, she said. The center is expanding our research program next year. We need someone who knows this area, someone who understands wolves and can live comfortably in remote conditions. Warren listened as she outlined a position that seemed tailor-made for him, a field researcher who would monitor wolf packs throughout the region, documenting their territories, hunting patterns, and family structures. The job would allow him to maintain his solitary lifestyle while contributing to important conservation work. You don't have to decide right away, Kara finished, but I hope you'll consider it. That night, back in his cabin, Warren found himself at a crossroads he hadn't anticipated. The job would give purpose to his solitude, transform his lifestyle from mere existence to meaningful contribution. Yet it would also mean more responsibility, more interaction with the research team, more paperwork and protocols to follow. As he pondered his decision, a familiar sound drifted through his open window, the distant howling of wolves. Among the voices, he thought he recognized the distinctive call of Athena, slightly higher pitched than her packmates. Warren stepped outside, listening intently as the howls echoed across the valley. The wolves were out there, living their wild lives according to ancient instincts and bonds. They neither needed nor sought his approval or understanding. Yet somehow, briefly, their path had crossed with his, creating a connection that transcended the boundaries between species. In that moment, Warren knew his answer. He would accept the position, not because he needed to change his solitary life, but because he had discovered something more valuable than complete independence. He had found purpose in protecting the wilderness that had saved him as surely as he had saved those wolves. The following morning, Warren called Kara to accept her offer. Her delight was evident even through the crackling radio connection. They arranged to meet later that week to discuss details and begin his training. As autumn painted the landscape in rich golds and reds, Warren settled into his new role with surprising ease. His cabin became a satellite research station, equipped with better communications and monitoring equipment. He maintained his independence while contributing valuable data to the center's ongoing projects. Occasionally, during his tracking expeditions, he would glimpse Athena and her growing pups, now gangly adolescents learning to hunt under the watchful eyes of the pack. He observed how her limp became more pronounced in cold weather, but never slowed her down completely. Orion remained her constant companion, the siblings' bond apparently undiminished by time and their return to the wild. On a crisp October morning, almost a year after the wolves had first appeared at his door, Warren was photographing tracks near a stream when he sensed a presence watching him. Slowly, carefully, he raised his head. There, on the opposite bank, stood Athena. She was alone, an unusual circumstance for a pack animal. Her amber eyes regarded him steadily across the flowing water. Neither predator nor prey, just two beings sharing a moment of mutual recognition. Warren remained motionless, hardly daring to breathe. After what seemed an eternity but was likely only seconds, Athena lowered her head in what almost resembled a nod. Then, with graceful movements despite her limp, she turned and disappeared into the forest. Warren didn't mention this encounter in his official report. Some experiences, he decided, were too personal, too fragile to be reduced to scientific observation. But he recorded it in his private journal that night, attempting to capture in words the profound sense of privilege he had felt in that moment. Life in the wilderness continued its seasonal cycles. Winter returned, bringing with it memories of that fateful night when two desperate wolves had sought shelter from the storm. Warren's cabin stood warm and welcoming as ever, but he was no longer merely waiting out the long, dark months in isolation. He had purpose now and connections to the research center, to Kara and her team, and in some indefinable way, to the wolves themselves. One evening, as snowflakes drifted lazily past his windows, Warren added another log to his fire and settled into his favorite chair. On the table beside him lay research notes, field guides, and a framed photograph Kara had taken of Athena and her pups from a distant observation point. It was a reminder of why his work mattered, why compassion toward wild creatures had ripple effects beyond immediate survival. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying with it the haunting chorus of wolves singing to the hidden moon. Warren closed his eyes and listened, feeling not alone but wonderfully, purposefully connected to the wild heart of a world he was only beginning to understand. The wolves at Warren's door had come seeking refuge for a night, and had inadvertently offered him something far more valuable, a way back to life itself.